have nature swiftness back. A lot of unpruning to bring more cat, bear, and chicken utility, changes to regrowth, and so many more exciting things to make Resto Druid actually exciting to play in Shadowlands. So strap yourself in, dear viewer, because you need to take some notes. So make sure you note down our stream times. We raid, do mythics, and test Shadowlands specs with our lovely community and viewers, and it's pretty dope, so you gotta check it out at twitch.tv/MarcelianOnline. We have 5 streaming days per week at different times in the hopes we can catch you at least in one of those days, at a good time. So see you there. And pruning. So far, Restoration Druid has received quite a bit of unpruning, either in the form of abilities becoming baseline and some reworks that bring back old mechanics to the spec. Ferocious Bite is now baseline without requiring a talent. On one hand, this makes sense. How can you shift into a cat and not bite? On the other hand, this doesn't tie you into feral affinity to be able to cat weave while preserving mana. Iron Fur is also baseline. The value of this is more towards quality of life. You can have Feral Affinity or Balance Affinity selected, yet if you need to soak an upcoming ability, you have the Bear option to maybe save you a cooldown. It's niche, clearly, but most baseline hybrid abilities are, and it just stands to build a more druid feel for any of the 4 available specs, which is pretty great. Cyclone is also baseline, and this is a major boon, especially for Resto. It comes from the PvP realm, but is still an iconic ability that should have never been locked behind anything. The uses of this are as of any incapacitate effects, and its strength relies on how it will function in higher end content like Mythic Plus. An undeniable amazing unprune is Stampeding Roar. Group-wide sprint is pretty straightforward. It takes away from Feral and Bear, but outside dungeons, Resto Druids were already pretty scarce on a competitive level, and normally that shouldn't matter, but community perception seems to influence people's accessibility to finding groups, so having a larger utility kit baseline will only be a good thing. Regrowth has been changed to have a new effect added to it once you level up to the respective level. Not a problem at max, of course. If you heal a target already affected by regrowth, it will have a 40% increased chance to critical strike. Critical hit. Is that right? Strike? The effect of this is simple, and that is to increase single target throughput. Since it's not a guaranteed effect to occur, means it's still not a 1 GCD save mechanic, but more like overall single target throughput. Nature Swiftness, on the other hand, comes to help with that even more. The long lost ability is back to make either regrowth, rebirth, or entangling roots instant on their next cast. With a 1-minute cooldown, this is essentially utility that can provide you with some needed versatility. In terms of actual healing, it's hard to say how much you will actually get from it. It's not designed to feel like a healing cooldown unless it can affect wild growth as well. But maybe that would be too much? Who knows? Iron Bark has been reworked a bit with the Stone Bark talent effect to increase the healing over time the target takes by 20% for its duration, but also has had its cooldown increased to 1.5 minutes. This was actually a pretty strong cooldown for a 1-minute cooldown in BFA, which explains the change. The change, though, needs to be balanced in that Resto Druid Kit is one of the best for dungeons, but not for raids. It was always hard to nerf the dungeon performance without affecting the raid. It's good if they will be more in line with the other healers, at least from a baseline perspective, but raiding performance needs to be addressed as well. Fingers crossed. Mostly because there isn't enough large group content to test yet, so we don't actually know. That being said, Swiftman has been reworked to behave like its older iteration, where it consumes a healing over time effect to heal the target instantly for a very large amount. It will consume a regrowth, wild growth, or rejuvenation, and it will heal for a flat amount regardless of the remaining time of any of the HOTS consumed. The one that will be consumed is based on a priority, with regrowth being number 1, wild growth 2, and rejuvenation 3. There will be some optimizing going around where you would want to keep track of HOTS and consume them close to their expiring time. The cooldown on it is fairly short, with only 15 seconds, but the usage will depend a lot on the content and what is happening, because efficiency aside, you still lack on-demand burst healing or a strong GCD to save a situation outside of Swiftment, of which is healing scales with mastery, so played right, you can heal for a decent amount. Lastly, Innervate has been buffed to give you 50% of its effectiveness if you cast it on somebody else, making this the default outcome you can wish for in a raid scenario. The only real issue with Innervate is an issue we all know, called GCD, where you press it and you have to wait 1.5 seconds before its effect can actually begin. In a vacuum, that wouldn't be an issue, except that's not how the game is designed, where you can chill in between abilities. Gameplay is fast and promotes quick responsiveness, and the GCD system is not building towards that. But we mentioned this before. At this point in time, the beta launched, but we still don't have access to legendaries and soulbinds with conduits. So you will get your Covenant things, but more will eventually come to be tested later on. The Kyrians of Bastion brings kindred spirits, and this was just recently changed on the beta, particularly obvious if you have watched our Boomkin and Feral videos. The changes are actually nice, but affect Resto the least at the moment. What the skill actually does is pairs you up with an ally, and when you activate it again, you each get a buff for 10 seconds based on each other's roll. You will heal the target for 50% of your overall healing, so think of it as the Holy Paladin Beacon. Pretty good. If your partner is the tank, you transfer part of the damage you take to them, and if your target is a DPS, 30% of their damage is transferred as a damage boost to you, or absorption. So far, it seems that I get both the damage increase and an absorb shield, which is superior, a much superior iteration of the effect compared to what we had before. The tooltip says 25%, in game it says 30%, so not sure if the percentage is flexible based on the DPS class. What's actually even better is you can do what I do after a hard day when I come back to bed and find it cold and lonely, and that is bonding with yourself. If you don't have an ally to pair up with, you can cast it on yourself, and as I was able to tell, you will be getting 10% damage increase, most likely aimed at solo content, so fucking finally. Moving on to the Maldraxxus boys, the Necrolords have Adaptive Swarm, and this is dope. Not the kind your parents warn you about, but the kind that makes you feel good when you use it. Adaptive Swarm is a hot or dot that heals or damages your target based on whether it's an ally or an enemy. Once it finishes its 12-second duration, it jumps to another target within 25 yards and does this up to 3 times. While it's active, it also empowers dots and hots by 20%, and its own hot counts towards your mastery. For single target healing, this could be what Resto Druids need to be a competitive raid tank healer. So far, so good. There are more benefits to this. It has a short cooldown, very short. Short enough that you can have multiple out as long as they don't jump on the same target and overlap. Interesting mechanic to play with for sure. Arden will get you with the Night Fae and Convoke Spirits. This is the most ridiculously entertaining ability and also the most unreliable. You channel for 4 seconds, yikes, and cast 16 random druid spells for the duration. The spells will favor your spec, but still cast damage ones. You have no control over the spells, and this seems to be a bigger problem for Resto since your gameplay shifts between healing and damage dealing, and maybe using it for one of the two when you would need the other will make it seem incredibly underwhelming. Yeah, no, it is underwhelming. I just thought about it. There is a smart AI here where if there are no targets to cast it on, you won't just spam thrashes, but instead heal like a maniac, and that can be pretty good outside combat. Lastly, Ravenous Frenzy comes from the Venthyr of Revendreth, and this is maybe the most straightforward ability without too much speculation as to its effectiveness. It provides you with a stacking haste increasing buff for 20 seconds each time you cast a druid spell. That can obviously be a heal, a dispel, a damaging ability, and so on. If you do become idle for 1.5 seconds, you get stunned for 1 second and damaged for 3% of your HP per haste stack accumulated. This is a big drawback, but realistically won't happen often if you time your ability when you know that nothing can stop you from casting for 20 seconds. Considering most of your abilities are instant and castable while moving, this should be a pretty minor detriment, but something to still consider. There are some talents that went away, and some that came from the PvP world. All in all, Resto is getting some spicy changes. With the change to Swiftment, it having a smaller cooldown and eating away at HOTS, Prosperity has been replaced with Nourish. This Nourish is different from the BFA PvP talent version. It heals for a flat amount and benefits from Mastery threefold. What this means with basic level 60 gear is that with full HOTS on you, it heals for less than a Swiftment on a long cast time, but doesn't eat a HOT, of course, so pros and cons. It might not be a great addition or worthwhile cast, but can definitely outscale a lot of other options with more gear. The more mastery you have, the bigger the tripled effect will be, so this is something to keep an eye out for, but might not be great at the start of the expansion. The affinities have been changed, where each of them grants an additional utility spell that you would be interested in. Balance Affinity brings with it Typhoon, meaning that you would actually have to spec into Balance Affinity to use the skill, whereas on live you can do it with Feral Affinity. Another interesting choice is that Balance could become competitive with Feral Affinity in terms of damage. More on that in a minute. Feral Affinity comes with Maim, which is actually something only Resto Druids would have advantage from, as opposed to Bear and Chicken. If you plan on cat weaving, having a big stun on a 20-second cooldown is pretty huge. If you plan on doing Mythic Plus, where add control plays a role into your survival, it can make a world of difference. Bear or Guardian Affinity brings Incapacitating Roar. Fairly straightforward and potentially better than Maim on a caster-heavy group. This can primarily be used to break casts, channels, and other actions mobs are taking that cannot be interrupted or silenced in an AoE fashion. This is all in terms of utility, but clearly you could be looking at damage output and survivability, and that will start to be more of an individual choice. To replace Typhoon, you will have Heart of the Wild back. A big 5-minute cooldown, this spell empowers your chosen affinity for 45 seconds to the point where you would choose your affinity based on what you want to get out of this one. That's how impactful this can be. We are talking here, of course, about the fundamental druid strength, the power to take over as a tank for 45 seconds, or a DPS, because with this, Balance Affinity could be a better choice than Feral, especially since that would mean you would get Typhoon as well, whereas before, Cat was superior for your damage output. The versatility of this one finally makes your affinity not just a side joke, and I cannot wait to play with it in proper content. Last but not least, Stonebark was replaced with Overgrowth, which is exactly the same as the BFA PvP talent, although with a larger 1-minute cooldown. This applies all of your HOTS on a target and could be considered a "oh shit" button. You could potentially use this on a DPS player that is about to or just soaked a large mechanic, leaving him or her dangerously low and in need of healing. Pop this and then Swiftment and you have 2 GCDs that apply a fair amount of healing to your target. Thing is, it's pretty expensive and you are giving up Spring Blossoms or even Inner Peace for it. It seems to definitely work for PvP arenas where your go-to PvP option here was Stonebark, now replaced with Overgrowth against pesky mages and shamans that dispel or steal your HOTS. But outside of that, this is so situational that it is hard to decide how good it will turn out to be, especially now that Nature's Swiftness is here to help apply an instant regrowth at no additional mana cost. More heavy on the GCD, but clearly more mana efficient. I like the overall hybridness changes to Resto Druid and by extension all of the other specs, and you will definitely feel like a bona fide druid in Shadowlands. There still are some questionable changes in Nourish and Overgrowth that we can only be sure of once the raid opens and Mythic Plus testing can begin. Jada wrote a very interesting Resto Druid article that you will find in the description after you're done with our video, of course. He made one of the more interesting points for Convoke the Spirits, and that is to have the ability to favor heavily spells based on your shapeshift form. That way you can use it with more control and predictability, where you swap into Cat and Convoke so you can deal some decent damage and have a DPS cooldown as a Resto Druid. That would be pretty dope. Or of course, go into Bear and potentially generate enough threats if your aim is to tank for a bit. Same with your caster / tree form. There is still the issue of it being a channeled ability though, so I feel the changes are going into a good direction. Also, I recommend you check the Dream Grove Discord channel for more advanced Druid feedback, which will definitely come now that the beta is out and more people have access to the game, albeit gradually. Thank you to the Patrons as well for supporting our channel and our content. Thankfully to you, we actually started a super secret project that you will get your hands on fairly soon. When is this video going live? Probably a little bit after when this video is going live, but it's pretty cool. And hey, you know, Patreon is not mandatory, but it is appreciated. So if you're interested in supporting us a little bit more because you like our content, check the link down below to our Patreon page. And you'll also find our Teespring page where Marcelian hand-drawn designs some graffiti-like t-shirts, mugs, and stuff like that. Kind of like this. It's my name. It's my name. Maybe you like that. Thank you for watching the video. We'll see you in the next one.